you doing? Justin here. Today we are checking out playing the major scale in thirds, which is a lot bigger deal than you might think. Now, playing major scales in thirds, I think, is a bit of a game changer for most people that are used to practicing scales just straight up and down. And the reason is that chords are constructed in thirds. We've touched on it a little bit when we looked at reactive listening. This idea of the notes in a G major chord are G, B, and D. Each one of those is play a note, miss a note, play a note, miss a note, play a note. That's how we get our chords. And it continues to work its way up through the scale until we get our diatonic chords, the chords in the key. When you play a scale in thirds, if you're already on a good note and you go up a third, you're very likely to be on another chord tone, another good note. Because of that, a lot of melodies, not all melodies, but a lot of melodies are based around thirds because they go from one chord tone to another chord tone. So the sound of the third as a kind of a melodic tool is very strong. And as soon as you start using a lot of thirds in your solos, in your improvisations or creating melodies, it just sounds stronger. We're used to hearing it as a very strong melodic idea. So I think practicing it a lot and making that kind of a default rather than playing a scale just straight up and down is a really, really good idea. So I think once you've learned to play scales in thirds, you probably want to spend more time practicing thirds than playing scales straight up and down. It will lead you to becoming a more melodic guitar player. If you think about we are what we eat, that old adage, you know, if you practice scales a lot straight up and down, you're going to end up naturally kind of wanting to do that. Whereas if you practice thirds up and down, at least if you naturally want to go there, you're going to end up with a more melodic result. Now, long term, again, I can't stress off how important it is to try and connect your musical imagination and your hand so that you can have a musical idea and let that get expressed through your fingers. But part of the process of developing your musical imagination, I think, is training it up of to hear good things. So practicing thirds, again, is kind of drilling those kind of sounds into your musical imagination and helping those kind of strong melodic ideas come out when you improvise. So a little bit too much raving there. Let's go and have a look at how to play them. So here's G major scale, pattern 1 in thirds. So what are we doing here? Now, a really easy way to look at this is like a little number game. If we number the notes of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. If we play note 1, miss note 2, and go on to note 3. So we go 1, 3. Then we go back to the note we missed, which would be note 2. We're going to miss one, which would be note 3, and then play note 4. So a kind of math sequence would be 1, 3, 2, 4, then 3, 5, 4, 6, 5, 7. So each time we're missing a note, playing the next one, and going back to the note we missed. Now, it really doesn't matter which option you choose, whether you go for like a pure maths idea and just think in terms of 1, 3, 2, 4, 3, 5, 4, 6, that kind of a thing. It's a fairly basic number sequence. If you're used to that kind of stuff and you're okay at maths, then that's probably a good approach. The approach I went for was just thinking miss a note and then go back to the one you missed. So we'd start here on the note G, we'd miss the next note of the scale, play the next one. So we missed one note, then we're going back to the one we missed. We're repeating it. So miss a note, play the next one, back to the one we missed. Miss a note, play the next one, back to the one we missed. Miss one note, back to the one we missed. Miss one note. Now, I would recommend that you spend a little bit of time just trying to do the calculations in your head as you play the scale. So either doing the maths while you're playing it or doing the miss a note and back to the one you missed idea. Either of those is good. If you're struggling with both of those, I also have a tab available over on the website which you can follow along. With this particular sequence, I think it's a good idea to get the logic figured out in your mind. If you make up more complicated sequences, it's definitely easier to read it off a page. So it's kind of up to you. If you want to use the tab one, it will still work because you're training your fingers up, and probably with a little bit of help from the tab, eventually the sequencing will become part of your programming anyway. So it's not too bad a thing. If you're going to use the sheet music, just try and kind of follow along with your eyes on the music, so you won't be able to look at your hand while you're doing that. So you want to be following the reading, like 3, 2 on the next string, then back to 5 on the thicker string. So you'll be staring at the music, not at your hand. So you want to be following along with the chart there. Now, you want to start definitely with just ascending. So just get working your way up the scale. And finishing on the highest note of the scale. Now, in pattern 1, you've got a couple of options. You can either drop back from the thinnest note, the highest note rather, and just finish back on the root note. So you end up... kind of feels nice and resolved doing it that way. For most other patterns, you don't want to be playing that top note and sinking back to the root note. Generally speaking, when I'm playing thirds, I play the top note twice when I'm turning around. So I'll go from here. Now the reason that I go for playing that top note twice is because it feels like it turns around a little bit better that way. It keeps it kind of consistent. Same on the bottom note. Now in pattern 1, that feels, again, it's just a little bit weird to me going down the pattern, because the root note is right there. It feels like it just wants to go. So it's up to you. For the other patterns, if you start applying this to pattern 2, you're probably going to play the top note twice, but for pattern 1, don't think it really matters too much. Now in pattern 1, there's only one real kind of technical challenge that you're going to have to overcome, and it goes from the 3rd string onto the 2nd string. So all of this part, nothing really weird, all of the fingering stays pretty much the same as you'd expect, but here, getting the little finger to roll off the 3rd string and onto the 2nd string, that might take a little bit of practice. Now I have a lesson specifically dedicated to string rolling, because the finger's rolling from the tip onto the flat there. Now when you're descending the scale, here you need to put little finger down a little flatter than you normally would to roll it onto the tip. If you put it down on the tip, then you have to skip over with the little finger, and that becomes a lot harder. So descending, flat, and then roll it onto the tip. You see I'm putting it down a lot flatter than usual, and then rolling the little finger onto the tip. Now this rolling idea is something that you're going to have to get used to for other scale patterns as well, with other fingers, especially when you start applying thirds or playing arpeggios and stuff like that. So it's a very useful skill to have. Whenever you encounter something that is really difficult, you can either choose to practice it and figure it out, not to do it, or find an alternative. So they're your 3 different options. I always think that practicing it's a good idea. If you stumble upon something that's really difficult, some people would prefer to choose a different fingering. Now for this particular one, there are not that many options that I really see. You could use little finger to 3rd finger, 2nd finger to 3rd finger. That could work, and if that's better for you, then that's okay. So long as you give thought to a fingering, a particular fingering for a scale or a kind of a musical technical problem, that's okay. What I don't think is a good idea is just going for the easiest one that feels right at the beginning. You want to sit down and think about the advantages and disadvantages of a particular fingering. Like I said, the rolling thing, I think it becomes a pretty useful technique to have further down the line. Lots of different scale patterns and melodic patterns will use that. So I'd be going with that one, but it is down to you. I would strongly recommend that you just practice thirds in pattern 1 for a while. Okay, at least maybe a week or 2 before you start to approach playing thirds in pattern 2. There are considerably more technical problems that happen when you start playing thirds in pattern 2. You're going to learn it. You should learn it. But I wouldn't learn it straight away. Get hip with it in pattern 1 first, train up the muscle memory, get used to playing it, and then have a look at pattern 2. Let me just take you through it. It is one of those ones where, as we progress on this kind of course, I'd recommend that you figure stuff out for yourself. I want to teach you the logic of figuring stuff out, because I think that's important. I want to teach you how to look for problems and solutions and how to get around it, because especially if you're learning on your own on the internet, there are going to be times where you're learning a song or an idea or a riff, or you're writing a riff. You're going to come across these kind of technical things. You're like, well, should I do it that way or that way? Which one's better? So let's have a little look at what happens if we play thirds in pattern 2. Let me start by showing you my fingering choice, and then I'll explain some of the options as we go. So this is it. Okay, the first part, that's all good. It's the same as every other time. But now, normally you would play this note here, the 5th fret on the 3rd string of the 2nd finger, but the next note that you want to play is here, the 5th fret on the 2nd string. So you could choose to roll the 2nd finger, then you'd need this, and you'd have to roll with your little finger as well. 2 of the weakest fingers doing rolls, that doesn't feel like a great option to me. You could go 2nd finger, 1st finger, 3rd finger, little finger, if you didn't like rolling at all. 2nd finger, 1st finger, 3rd finger, 4th finger. Once you're here and you've got 1st finger there, there's nothing difficult going on as well. It's just that transition here. Now what I prefer is 1st finger, roll, 3rd finger, roll. Now there's a few reasons that I prefer this 1st finger and 3rd finger. If you didn't notice already, this pattern looks a little bit like the minor pentatonic. We've got that as an additional note, that as an additional. So I kind of see this nice minor pentatonic shape here, with that as an extra note, that as an extra note, extra note, extra note. And this scale, the G major scale in the key of A, is the Dorian mode. So very often I'll be using this G major scale in an A bluesy sort of a situation, or an A minor situation. So therefore, keeping my 1st finger and 3rd finger like that, we're still, this is kind of hit for pentatonic-y sort of style things. I could keep it going. And now we're into this proper kind of major scale thing. But because it's so useful as the pentatonic, I think 1st finger, 3rd finger doing rolls. 3rd finger again, roll, 1st finger, roll. Trying to think what I do there. I think I'm using my little finger, 1st finger. This is all still the same, but now it gets super tricky going down here further. All the same so far, little finger, 2nd finger. Now at this point, we would normally have used our 1st finger there. It does start to get a little tricky. And now we'd have that little jump with the little finger. So I choose to do that. 2nd finger here. 1st finger, 2nd finger, 3rd finger. I step up. Okay? 3rd finger, little finger. This is a weird fingering. Down here it's all easy. Again, I step with 2nd finger. So there's that very weird bit, 3rd finger, stretching back with the 2nd finger. Okay, so just from that root note going down, there's the awkward jump. There's the awkward jump. Now that lower part, I'll be honest, it doesn't tend to happen that way in the real world. My fingers just don't fall that way. Now I'm big on to kind of practicing those kind of exercises, because I think thirds are a really good thing to train your musical imagination with, as I've talked a bit about already. So the idea of practicing that lower part of that scale, I don't feel like I can not do it, because I'm a completist and I can't do just the top part of the scale. But I'm definitely 100% in improvising land. I'm much more likely to use the thinner part of that scale. But again, I think it's good to train up the fingers to do those awkward things, especially if you're trying to train to play things that you hear in your musical imagination, you want your fingers to be able to do the things that you imagine. What you don't want to do is imagine this idea and your fingers kind of end up getting tied in knots because they can't action the idea. So I do think it's a good idea. I think it's worth thinking a little bit about the fingering choices as well. It's definitely one of those things I spent quite a lot of time trying to decide which was the fingering that worked better for me. Now, obviously, just going through what I was explaining there is pretty complicated. Again, there's a tab over on the website, so you can download the tab of playing the thirds in pattern 2 with the fingering written on there for you, or my suggested fingering. You don't have to stick to it. You could decide to change the fingering to whatever you feel comfortable with or confident with. There is also another approach, which is using these 3 note per string scales, which makes playing thirds a lot easier again. There was a little bit of me going, oh, maybe I should just show them the 3 note per string version of this scale, and then they don't have to worry about that. But again, sometimes there's things that are a little bit difficult, which are worth working through. Some of the best sights in the world take a lot of effort to see. And I think that's the same with a lot of these guitar things. If you always go for the path of least resistance, you miss out on some of the great things. So I think it's worth it. There are other options. You can either change the fingering, you can not do it, or you can look for an alternative, which in this case would be to look at the 3 note per string system for pattern 2. It is something we're going to cover a little bit further down the line. I would recommend you stick with this one for now, but all of these things are personal decisions. You have to choose which battles you want to face and whether that particular fingering on that lower part of that scale is one that you want to battle with. Again, just in case you missed that little bit or you fast forwarded it, make sure you can do it in pattern 1 first of all. Okay, spend the majority of your time getting the thirds down in pattern 1 before you even think about pattern 2. Once you're confident with pattern 1, then maybe alternate it. So spend one day just refining pattern 1, making sure you're super confident with that, and then spending a bit of time thinking about the fingering. Spend your 5-minute practice session figuring it out, feeling it out with your fingers. What fingering feels good for you? How can you do the finger rolling? You might find that finger rolling as an exercise is something that you want to do. There are some great exercises again over on the website on the finger rolling exercise. It's a really nice one to work on with your pentatonic scale as well. Sounds pretty hip. A lot of the modern blues guys like Larry Carlton and Robin Ford use a lot of that finger rolling stuff on the pentatonic scale. It is a super cool trick, something to explore. There's one more lesson for you in Unit 4, and it's all about motif development. It's an incredibly powerful tool, this one. The idea is that you learn how to take one little musical idea and expand it into a whole painting, rather than just always taking out a little bit, playing a bit of scale, moving a bit of position, do a bit of a bend or a slide or something. We're looking to take a musical idea and dig around, twist it as many different ways as we can to get as much juice out of that one idea as we can. I often think of it like storytelling. If you have too many ideas and they don't kind of link up with each other properly, people get a bit confused. And with motif development, it's a little bit more like you're telling and developing a story, or developing a character in a story, or whatever way you want to look at it. But it's definitely musically stronger, artistically stronger, and it makes more sense to the listener when you compose that way, when you improvise that way. So I really hope you'll join me for that, and I'll see you for more very soon. You all take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.